Welcome to literary and jury charge practice. Let's start out with some jury charge. Ready? Here we go. Do not automatically reject testimony just because of inconsistencies or conflicts. Consider whether the differences are important or not. People sometimes honestly forget things or make mistakes about what they remember. Also, two people may witness the same event yet see or hear it differently. If you do not believe a witness's testimony that he or she no longer remembers something, that testimony is inconsistent with the witness's earlier statement on that subject. If you decide that a witness deliberately lied about something significant in this case, you should consider not believing anything that witness says. Or if you think the witness lied about some things but told the truth about others, you may simply accept the part that you think is true and ignore the rest. Both the crime charged and the special allegation in this case require proof of the union or joint operation of act and wrongful intent. For you to find a person guilty of the crime of murder as charged in count 1, that person must not only intentionally commit the prohibited act, but must do so with a specific intent and mental state. The act and specific intent and mental state are explained in the instruction for that crime. For you to find the allegation of intentional discharge of a firearm causing death to be true, that person must not only commit the prohibited act, but must do so with wrongful intent. A person acts with wrongful intent when he or she intentionally does a prohibited act. However, it's not required that he or she intend to break the law. The act required is explained in the instruction for that allegation. Neither side is required to call all witnesses who may have information about the case or to produce all physical evidence that might be relevant. The testimony of only one witness can prove any fact. Before you conclude that the testimony of one witness proves a fact, you should carefully review all the evidence. If you determine there's a conflict in the evidence, you must decide what evidence, if any, to believe. Do not simply count the number of witnesses who agree or disagree on a point and accept the testimony of the greater number of witnesses. On the other hand, do not disregard the testimony of any witness without a reason or because of prejudice or desire to favor one side or the other. What is important is whether the testimony or any other evidence convinces you, not just the number of witnesses who testify about a certain point. During the trial, certain evidence was admitted for a limited purpose. You may consider that evidence only for that purpose and for no other. Alrighty, now let's try some literary material. This is one we had started called Mr. Churchill. Mr. Churchill had it right. Ready? Here we go. So now I will tell you some things you should never do when taking this test. 1. Never fly to Minneapolis to take the test. Go back to the airport to head home, fall asleep through your 2 p.m. flight, and have to wait 8 hours in the Minneapolis airport for the next flight home. Oh yeah, in the annals of test taking, I reign supreme. Don't do this. I still have the twins kitchen magnet. 2. Never have a beer 45 minutes before the start of the test out of the misguided belief that, born from sheer desperation and the mindset that this will finally calm your nerves, Sam Adams has no place at the CRR test. Do leave home without him. Doesn't work. Don't do it. 3. Never not practice and or practice very little a week and a half before the test in the mistaken perception that you're fast enough. Arrogance diminishes wisdom. You can never be fast enough for any test. Don't do this. 4. Never take an entire tablet of propanidol an hour before the test. Try this once. By the time of the actual test, I did not care about anything. No, I mean anything. The world is coming to an end. Bring it, baby. Don't do this one either. 5. Never not know exactly where the test site is. One time I think it's where it has been for years. Oops, now it's changed to another site. Yikes. Not reading the info on the test and then rushing to set up your equipment, getting a few minutes of warm-up. Forget it. Don't do that one either. Stop. David, you're killing me. Talk about snake-bitten, all self-imposed. There is one more thing you should never do, and I will leave it to Winston Churchill to remind you. 6. Never give in. Never, 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 never. That will finish that literary. And now let's get back to this lit that we were working on, and it's called A Good Start. And these are students and reporters and just some questions that were asked of them and their responses. Ready? Here we go. Once you graduate, what area of the court reporting field do you plan to go into and why? I plan on beginning my career as a freelance reporter. One of the many aspects that attracted me to court reporting was the opportunity to do this job virtually anywhere in the country. Freelancing will give me the ability to relocate when it's time to move on to the next place. I will likely work locally for the first year or two after certification, but I'm eager to experience another part of the country and expose my son to different cultures, languages, traditions, and lifestyles. I have also strongly considered working for an international freelance agency to expand upon those experiences for myself and for my son, especially as he gets older. Eventually, I may choose to settle down and become an official reporter somewhere, but only time will tell. How soon do you plan to test for your RPR certification? I passed the written knowledge portion of the RPR in January of this year, and it's an indescribable feeling being one step closer to professional certification. I've reached 200 words per minute in jury charge, and I'm at a working speed of 180 words per minute in both Q&A and literary. I still have a lot of work ahead of me, but I'm very glad that the testing schedules for the skills test will become more flexible. I'm no longer putting pressure on myself to reach goal speed in a time frame that may not be very realistic. And that was Cassandra Hall from Xenia, Ohio. Now let's try some of this closing argument. Ready? Here we go. As you know that they would require at least 4 or 3 pieces of GSR before you could call it GSR, there's a lot of other places you can get lead and barium antimony. And he said, yeah, our lab's a little looser than other labs. But even in his loose lab, they only found 1 particle. Now, why is that important? Because Mr. Macaulay, he says, okay, if you have an enclosed area like this chicken coop was, I don't think we got a measurement on it, but just from the photo and everything, it looked about 15 feet. It had a doorway. It was about 7-8 feet wide. It was about 7 or 8 feet high, closed on 3 sides, and you go in there and you fire a gun. How many particles come out of that gun? He said millions of little GSR particles. There's a gas cloud and it drapes and blows, and yet out of 1,000,000 particles in an enclosed place, he only got 1 on his sleeve, 1 on his pants. How can you shoot that gun in that enclosed place and only have 1 on your sleeve and 1 on your pants? Did somebody blow away or do away with the other 999,998 particles? He was actually the best witness in this case for the defense. Based upon what he said, my client could not have been there when the gun was fired. I asked him that, wouldn't you have expected a lot more particles? He said, yeah, I would have expected a lot more particles. I said, how far does the gunshot residue spray? And he said, well, 10 to 12 feet. Now, I don't know where that fired cartridge casing went when it came out of that gun. We know where it landed, and the police officer said it either comes out the right or out of the left, sometimes out of the top, but it landed pretty far into that building. It wasn't like it was at the opening of it. It wasn't outside. It was way in there. And when that cartridge casing came out, it kind of identifies where the shooter has to be. He was in that building with those 1,000,000 particles. Now those particles settle to the ground. They settle on stuff. They settle on her. And the evidence is that when the first responders got there, my client showed him where the body was, showed him how he put a little shirt under her head and did whatever the 911 operator said to do. She had gunshot residue all over her, according to Mr. Macaulay, and that probably is where a piece got onto my client's sleeves or on his shorts. He went in that building, might have picked up a couple. So is that circumstantial evidence that can only point one way? Is that circumstantial evidence that doesn't point a lot stronger to one side than the other? Absolutely it is. There was something else about Mr. Macaulay I thought was interesting, very interesting. He said he was also an expert in other areas besides gunshot residue. Do you remember what he said he also was an expert in? He's an expert in shoe comparisons. He's an expert in tire comparisons. I'll let that sink in for a minute. He's an expert in shoe comparisons. He's an expert in tire comparisons. Did we have any of that in this case? I can't remember. Oh, wait, we did. There were shoes all over the place, and the government was trying to say that some of those shoes were similar to the first responders. And there's a guy on the stand that can say yes or nay, but they never did that test. They didn't do it. I don't know if it's because they didn't want to think about what they might find out or not. But if you have the evidence and you have an expert and you didn't show it to him and have him testify, that to me is circumstantial evidence going one way. And the tires, the same thing. We had some funny tire prints. They are funny tire prints. What did the government say? Well, they had this criminalist up there, and the criminalist said, I couldn't get much on this one because it looked kind of bald. Now, when we looked at the photos, you can see there's characteristics there. You can see how white it is, kind of see what the edges looked like. Then he said, then we have one with squiggles. And here's a picture of a tire on a golf cart that has some squiggles. That's probably it. But you see, that's a long way from it. That's a long, long way from it. All right, back to our literary called A Good Start. And these are some questions of Heather Piper from Hinckley, Ohio. Ready? Here we go. What attracted you to the court reporting profession? In 2010, I graduated from a 4-year university with a bachelor's degree in psychology, but after a few years of working, I began to realize that I wasn't interested in any of the careers that degree could get me. I started researching careers that didn't have huge time constraints required to get the training I needed, but still offered satisfying and well-paying jobs. I saw court reporting mentioned, did a little research on the job market and education requirements, and applied to a program that same day. How long did you anticipate it would take you to finish the program and graduate? Before I got started in the program, I assumed 2 years was a fairly standard amount of time to finish in, and I thought I might even be able to get away with finishing slightly faster since I already had a bachelor's degree, which knocked out a lot of my general education requirements. Once I started the program and realized how challenging court reporting can really be, I started worrying that I would never be able to finish. I am really pleased to be finishing right around the 2-year mark. What do you think helped you get through the program in 2 years? It helped that my bachelor's got most of my general education requirements out of the way and allowed me to focus the majority of my time and energy on classes that were relevant to court reporting. It's easy to lose motivation when you feel like there are too many distractions pulling your focus away from your true goal. Can you tell us about your internships? We are required to complete 80 internship hours total, 40 hours in a deposition setting, 40 hours in a courtroom setting. Those hours are required to be split between at least 3 different counties and a minimum of 3 reporting firms in order to give us a good idea of how the working environment can vary. I recently attended the Ohio Court Reporters Association's annual conference in Columbus, Ohio, and I was able to talk to several working reporters who very generously offered to help me complete my hours. All right, and that will conclude our literary and jury charge practice.